This is the Your Sports Resource Podcast, where each week you'll learn actionable strategies that you can implement so the operations of your club support your coaching staff and the direction of your organization. We are committed to excellence in youth sports leadership. Let's get started. Hello, and welcome everyone to the Your Sports Resource Podcast. Today, I'm really excited to have one of my clients on as a special guest. Her name is Shannon Harting, and she is the president of 757 Swim from Williamsburg, Virginia. So just to offer a bit of background, 757 is a USA Swimming Level 3 bronze club with approximately 300 swimmers, and their head coach is Morgan Cordell. Now, I started with 757 because they had an urgent matter that needed to be resolved, but I won't disclose what that was. But I worked with Shannon and Morgan and her board to get through that situation. And then from there, they decided to engage me to work with them on developing their vision, values, and behaviors. And we went through a whole organizational design process as well. So today we're mainly going to talk about what it means to be the president of a swim club, president of a board of a swim club. And then we might talk a little bit about our working together. So welcome, Shannon. I am pleased to have you on the podcast.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
No problem. No problem. Now, what I'd love for you to start with is just, tell us a bit about yourself. How long have you been at 757? And then maybe a little bit about your progression onto the board and to the president role.
Sure. So I am inherently a business person. In my real job, I own a hotel management company and have been doing that for 25 years. I don't want to exactly date myself, but I've got lots of business experience that I brought to the role. I was not a swimmer. I no, college or high school level athletic experience. Anyone who knows me would tell you I'm a klutz and not coordinated enough to be an athlete. My husband wasn't a swimmer either. So we found this world of swimming just because of a really passionate neighborhood swim coach that saw my son and was like, hey, his feet point outward. He's a breaststroker. I want him. And so we kind of tumbled in without having any idea what we were getting into. And after a couple of years of summer swim, my son loved it. And so, we started exploring clubs. And at the time, 757 was just starting up. In fact, the first time we asked our coach about it, she said, there's a new club starting. Why don't you give it a couple months? Let's see how this shakes out. I think it might be something that would be a good fit and you're interested in. And so, I was like, okay, great. And so we ended up actually waiting about another 6 months before we joined the club, but didn't know anything, had no idea what we were in for. But after, I want to say, a year and a half, my husband happens to be a PGA golf professional. And so they asked me to run a fundraising golf tournament for the club.
Okay.
And that was my entrance to, the more you work, the more you work. So I was later asked to come on board as the secretary, where I served for a year. And then when 757 first started, there was a caveat that board members could only be on the board for 4 years. And so I came in on the board at 3 years. And then at that fourth year, all of a sudden, we realized that a ton of people were rolling off the board and there was really no one to roll into that president role. And so I had only been on the board a year, but there were basically two of us that were staying that were potential candidates, and the second person wasn't able to do it. So I don't know if it was so much that I sought it out or the position picked me or karma or fate.
Right.
But that was in May of 2019, and I took office in August of 2019. At the same time, over that summer in between when I was elected and when I took office, we had our second full-time head coach. At the time, we only had 140 members and 2 full-time employees. And one of them decided to move home to New Jersey to be closer to family. And so that was a struggle from, okay, you're walking in and this is a, small club and you've got now half your staff gone. And then 6 months later, we were in COVID. And we
Right.
had all of those challenges. And then a year after that, we ended up being faced with either, you have to buy your pool or you could end up losing control of your swim space. So I had no
Okay.
idea what I was walking into when somebody said, "Hey, you're one of two people that's been here a year. Could you step up and do this?" And,
Yeah.
at the time, my husband said it was an intelligence test, and I failed when I said yes. Um, but we've done, I look back on it now, and so much fun stuff has happened and so much growth, that I wouldn't change a thing. But it was
Yeah.
definitely, I had no idea what I was jumping into.
Yeah. So there's a couple things in there that I want to pick apart, but the first one is because I think it's really relevant to a lot of clubs is that, you said you don't understand the impetus, but like you fell into the president's role. And I think that that's pretty common in a lot of clubs that they take whoever really puts their hand up because they're so desperate for volunteers. And one of the things that I try to work through with clubs is, okay, it's okay to have that mindset to a point, but you have to actually recruit for skill sets because leading, because it's not just a kids sports club, right? It is actually a business, and you need leadership skills to be the president of uh, an organization such as a swim club, no matter what size it is. Now, I know you already had that background, as you've mentioned, but like, what do you think the right skills are for someone to be the president of a generally, because I know the role is different for every club, right? Some are very active and involved in the doing, and some are more guidance and leadership. But like, what skills do you think you feel lend themselves to the role that clubs really should be looking for?
I think it takes someone who is able to see the big picture, because it's so easy to get focused on what matters to your child or your child's group. And I think,
Mm,
as a president or even a board member, you really have to be able to look at what's best for the whole, even if that's not what is best for you all the time, because there's no situation that's
right.
going to perfectly serve every athlete, unfortunately. So it really is, it takes someone that is able to look at the big picture. Um, Certainly a leadership component, but I think that really, you have to have a leadership component, but you also have to know when to butt out.
Yeah.
It's very difficult. I have a strong personality. I've run my own businesses. I think I have a good idea of how things should always go. And more than once, Morgan has had to say to me, "You know what? You're overstepping here. You need to step back." And thankfully, we have a good enough relationship that I can take that and go, "Okay, this is not my role, and let's look at it." And you have to be able to kind of navigate that, but also, not get your feelings hurt super easily.
Yeah.
And you have to be able to really communicate with your members. If you're not a people person, this is not the job for you, um,
Yes, that's
because you're
true.
going to get 10 million emails. Probably not 10 million. That's an overstatement. But there are times when I
It
open,
probably feels that way though.
there are moments, yes,
Yeah.
where, whether it's questions or information, and if you mind being bothered, then it's going to drive you crazy. I'm someone who, I would much rather someone just shoot me a quick email and say, "Hey, where's this? What's that?" And, I can say, "You know what?" And hopefully try and teach them and say, "This is where you can go on the website to find this information in the future." But if you're going to get annoyed
Right.
by every single one of those, little emails, then it's just going to drive you crazy. You really have to enjoy teaching and helping members along. And it's nice for me to know that I was once someone who was clueless of the swim world, because I can
Mm,
relate to those new families that are like, "What? Huh?" It isn't,
yeah.
you have to be able to relate to that.
Okay, good. So, you mentioned talking about Morgan telling you like, "Hey, really stay in your lane," kind of thing. But and I think one of the conversations that I tend to end up having with clubs, and it's usually one way or the other, is that you have to let, whether it's your swim school director, your head coach, or the person who runs any form of program in the business, you have to let them own their role. But what I typically see is either the board is massive in micromanaging and finger wagging, or they're the exact opposite. They're completely hands-on with no support and no accountability. Do you How do you feel like, and if you do, how do you feel like you straddle that line and do the balance of letting Morgan own her role, but also not being afraid to hold, whoever, like her or anybody else, accountable to ensure that they follow through on what the vision or what the delivery should be or the outcome and goals should be for the club?
So I think that's an area where we really had a challenge, and it goes back and forth. There are times where, especially because of our growth, when we were a club of 150, she didn't have the resources to be able to do everything herself. And so we had to be a little more
Right.
involved. And we still aren't to the place where we can, just be procedural and, set policy and step back. There are times where
Right.
she needs support. But frankly, it is an area we have struggled with because, parents come to board members and they're like, "Hey, I think this," and "Hey, can I do that?" And they're all wonderful, great ideas. But if you put yourself on the receiving end as a head coach, if all 7 board members are calling and henpecking you with every idea from every member they've gotten, it's going to drive you
Yeah.
absolutely insane. And so,
Right.
frankly, that's been something that you have really helped us with. I think that's an area that was a struggle for us as we have grown. And it was really invaluable when you were able to come into town and sit with the entire board and kind of say, you guys need to stay in your lane. And, if there's a problem, this is how you can respond. Because some of it is, as a board member, you are still a man of the people, meaning you are
Hmm.
in the bleachers, in the stands at swim meets, or, at whatever the athletic, type, if it's in the fields or whatever. But you're out there with all the other parents. And so they see you and want to give you feedback and be the representative. And that's awesome. And I love that. But at the same time, if every single idea you get, you then go running back with, or every single, hey,
Right.
there was a typo in this email, and you run back with all that, it drives people crazy. And so you've
Yeah.
got to, big picture, think about it. And I think you were really helpful in kind of outlining some of those roles and responsibilities for us so that we all really had a good understanding of where we should be operating. And yet at the same time, we also want to support. So at any time a member wants to come to us, we want to hear that feedback, but then we're able to kind of filter that through some of what you taught us and say, okay, is this something that needs to be acted on? Or is this something that I can help educate someone? Or, where can we go from here?
Right.
Um, as opposed to running back with everything.
Yeah. I think the key factor to my mind is building that relationship, because you want a relationship to where, let's say Morgan was just thinking of something really, she's trying to solve a problem and she like went way out there on her creativity, right? And it was just foreign to anything that you've ever done before. Well, you want her to be able to be comfortable, or any head coach to be comfortable enough to say, hey, I want to float this idea. I want to put this forward, because being innovative is going to be key for you guys to stay ahead of your membership and to be relevant to the community, right? But you may, as far as the accountability is concerned, go, oh, I understand your reasons. I love 1, 2, and 5. 3 and 4, can we mitigate these problems? Because we see this is coming down the pike. How can we, the pike, how can we handle that? And I think the problem is with that relationship piece missing with a lot of clubs. They don't get to have that back and forth of a board truly supporting the head coach, because often 9 times out of 10, they hear about an idea after it's already been tossed out and implemented, and then it all comes crashing down. And then the board is, on the back foot because everybody's coming and complaining, and they can't even support the head coach because they're taking all the complaints about something they didn't even know about. So I do believe it's a really good, delicate balance between ownership and accountability, but it all stems from that relationship piece.
Yeah, and we are really fortunate. I think I've met a lot of different folks, and we are very fortunate to have Morgan because she is a forward thinker. And so she does,
Mhm.
like to try some stuff out of the box. But I think that she's really good at filtering. And probably this is a better question for her, but she's really good at filtering, having the checkbox or the boxes she checks with questions. Okay, is this in the budget? Because if it's not in the budget, then she's going to go to someone and say, hey, is this doable? Can we make room for this? But if it's already something where we've built some discretion, or it fits into a budget line where we knew we were going to spend some money on X, Y, or Z, we just weren't really sure what that was going to look
Right.
like, then she knows, okay, she's got that availability to her. And then secondly, does it fit with our policies? Meaning, does it conflict with any formal policy that's been set by the board? So, once we cross those
Right.
hurdles, the last one really has to do with, where you helped us in developing our vision, values, and beliefs, because those provide a good litmus test of, okay, does it fit with these items? And then once you go through all of that, then yes, she might, she's very good at keeping us informed, and she'll shoot emails if something happens during the month, but then she has a monthly coaches report that she gives to us at the board meetings. But she's very good at recognizing where we might get feedback and trying to have us ready for that before, there's any
Right.
fallout.
Okay, great. That's great advice for those who are listening. I love it. So, are you able to give us an example of a problem the board had to work through and how you navigated through that, the back and forth, and how you came to a decision and how you worked together to solve that problem?
So I'm going to give an example that relates to COVID. And so I know that may not, hopefully, we aren't ever going to be in that situation again, but I thought it was a unique situation because there was a lot of question about when to reopen the pool deck to parents for them to be able to come in and
Mm-hmm.
watch practices. And for every parent that, we had parents that said, we want every child on the pool deck to be in a mask at all times that they're not in the water, to parents that said, realistically, if they're swimming and they just hop out to go to the bathroom, we don't think they should have a mask at all, and everything in between. And
Yeah.
on the board, we had, both ends of the spectrum, and it really was challenging to try and find something. I mean, at one point, a few parents had gotten together and gone to one board member and really put him on the spot. And, he came to us and said, the people have spoken. And his attitude was he had heard from 5 members and of our, at that time, 220 member club. He had heard from 5 members, the people had spoken, and these things needed to happen, which wasn't necessarily all of the people. And it didn't necessarily fit with all of our, our processes. And there were so many things to think about. Safe sport procedures had changed quite a bit from before COVID to after COVID. So if we're reopening the pool deck, what new things do we have to put in place to now also meet those, be compliant with safe sport? And so we really had to all come together. We consulted experts. We had a team of people within our club that were healthcare professionals that we were able to kind of call on and say, okay, what's reasonable? And the best advice we were given, and this is what we ended up doing. There's a gentleman, Steve Quinn, who's one of our parents and is also an ER doctor. And he said, you need to
Okay.
pick a board or some type of organization and follow them. He said, for example, and in our case, we picked the Williamsburg James City County School Board. And he said, if you
Mm.
say we are just going to follow what they do, then that really takes the pressure and the impetus off of you. He said, you guys don't need to sit back
Yeah.
as a board and debate back and forth, but find an organization who you trust and respect. And it might be, for other clubs and other situations, it might be we're just going to follow the USA swimming guidelines, or we have,
Right.
XYZ club that we feel like is our mentor club that we're trying to trend toward. I mean, for us, as a smaller club in Virginia, we a lot of times will look at Tide Swimming and Nova Swimming, who have kind of, especially Tide, I feel like is a few years ahead of us, but in the progression of kind of steps that we're taking. And we were really fortunate. They
Right.
recommended you to us. And I think that that's been key to our growth. But you'll look at key other clubs and really just find an organization that you say, okay, I'm going to really trust that these folks, and again, back to our current problem. In that case, it was the Williamsburg James City County School Board. We're going to trust that they've done the research, that they know what they're doing, and we're going to mentor that. And he said, and as long as you're following another organization that is a trusted organization, you won't really get in trouble for it. And so that's how we kind of came together to agree to maybe disagree in our personal lives. And, maybe this isn't how we
Right.
would all run our own businesses, but that as a nonprofit, as a member of USA Swimming, as someone that represents 300 members, this was something we could stand behind. That wasn't an opinion. It wasn't one person thinks
Right.
this, one person thinks that, but something firm that we could say, this is something we can all be on board with and present a united front.
And you think that really helped with people who were coming in with their personal bias? It kind of pulled you together. Like you said, they kind of, you agreed to disagree, but felt confident in that following another organization to where you trusted their process.
Yeah, I think it took some of the ego and personal sting out of it. Because I
Mm,
think people can initially feel personally attacked and feel like they've got skin in the game. And it's so important to remember that what you would do at home or in your own personal business that you own
right.
can't be 100% the same in what you would do for a nonprofit. Um,
That's
so
right.
that was really something we had to work through and just decide that, you know, this was a universal decision.
Yeah. All right. Good. Good. That's great. All right. I want to shift gears for a second. Can you tell us? I'd like for you to share with the audience what impact you feel the work we did together, either with what impact it had on the club, either through the vision, values, and behaviors or the organizational design or both. What kind of impact do you think that work? And I'm not trying to say that what I did with you, but you as a club doing that work, what kind of impact do you feel that it's had on your club over the last year?
So I really feel like the vision, values, and beliefs gave us a larger direction. As I mentioned, our club has grown quite a bit and really quickly. So we've gone from
Mm-hmm.
150 members to over 300 members, so more than doubled in size in about 3 years. And so inevitably, we were having trouble servicing all of our members and really understanding how we had changed from a club that was, a small town feel and everybody knew everybody and everything, and everybody
Yeah.
knew the vision and values, right? Like everyone that had helped start the club was on board and they created, you know, what the club culture was. And of course, that was the same to now at 300 members, there were people who didn't know everyone's name. And so, um,
Yeah.
and when you first mentioned to us vision and values, to be frank, I thought, well, I think we know who we are. Like, I feel like we need to figure out a way to get volunteers more involved and get, some things under control. But I feel like we know our vision and our values. I think that's okay. And I thought, is this really the most valuable like use of our time? And then, you came into
Right.
town and we were spending time together. And, as you're sitting there going through it, you're thinking, man, this is all big picture stuff, but I've got a list of like 25 operational things sitting in the office waiting for me. And like, gosh, how am I going to get it all done? And here I'm sitting here talking about this frou-frou stuff. And yeah, and that's it. Like you're thinking there's a million other
Yeah.
things you could be doing. And then now in hindsight, and Morgan and I ironically had this conversation 3 days ago. Ironically, it has really framed the whole the whole club and really positioned us for growth. It is what has professionalized what I think we all kind of felt in our hearts. But it was interesting when you had all those cards with different words on them. We
Mm-hmm.
each had a different word we would have put on it. It was articulated slightly differently. And so it was great to kind of pull that together and come together on the same ones. And we've been able to use that. We have bought in full bore on the vision, values, and belief. Meaning, if you go to the homepage of our website, they are there loud and proud on banners.
Right.
We have had banners made at our club meeting, our initial full team meeting at the beginning of the year. We had, stands with every single one of them. It is something we have embraced full bore for Our coaches, they send weekly emails, and Morgan sends, quarterly emails, and those each have a theme based around that month's value. Um, it is a litmus test for you. We were talking a little while ago about the decisions, whether Morgan feels she needs to bring them to us always, or whether she can go out on a limb, or, when there's something on a board basis that we aren't all on the same page for, it really provides a
Mm-hmm.
backdrop for all of those things, a litmus test to say, does this fit here? Is this the right thing there? And so while I might have told you when you first recommended it, oh, I don't know, I'm not positive we need that. Um, in hindsight, I'm so glad we did it. And Morgan said the same thing, like when we
Yeah.
had the conversation, like it just changed the culture and the standard. And I can't tell you, so in September, we have our full club meeting. And,
Mm-hmm.
all of our new members, that's an opportunity for them to come pick up their uniforms and kind of meet everybody and whatever. I can't tell you how many members after that meeting came up to me, stopped me, and said, wow, this is just so professional. This is so well done. We're so impressed. This is unlike anything we've ever been involved in, with baseball or soccer or, whatever their current club was. I mean, it could,
Yeah.
certainly it doesn't have to be swim, but the level of professionalism that provided really spoke to parents. And I think it's a difficult time right now. I'm just going on and on. So feel free to stop me if you want me to.
No, it's good. It's good.
But no, it's sports have gotten expensive. Everything has gotten expensive right now. And
Yes.
so it's hard when you're writing a check every month or an annual check and it's a lot of money and you're like, man, is what is the value in me spending all this money on my kids' education when I'm spending so much or not education, on my kids' sport, when I'm spending already so much on groceries and so much on utilities, like the cost of everything has gone up.
Mm-hmm.
And why are you not cutting out your kids' sport? And I think so many of them felt like the vision and values and were a added value to what it costs to be a member of our club, because it
Right.
showed not just how, we're going to make your kid a superstar and they're going to go to the Olympics someday, because let's face it, they probably aren't. And not say I don't want to offend anybody, I
Yeah.
don't want to shock anyone, but they probably aren't.
Yeah.
But we are building good humans, and we do have a culture of a strong vision, values, and beliefs. And I think when parents see that, it helps them to feel good about the investment they're making, because it is an investment. I mean, it's
Right.
not just teaching their kid the breaststroke, but it's also teaching their kid integrity. It's also, teaching their kid to be responsible and ready. It's also all those
Yeah.
things. So I feel like it really, as we've had to, evaluate costs going into this difficult time, of inflation, et cetera, having those things there have helped parents justify making the investment in the club.
That's amazing. I think I use you guys as an example quite a bit because, like you said, you guys were all in on walking the walk on the behaviors and values. And I think I still have clubs that kind of do the work, but they have no interest in making it real. And so from my perspective, that's just a waste of money, effort, and time, right? So I think because you guys, you took it on board and you incorporated it into all of your volunteer work, all of the work that you do with the swimmers and the families, and then all of the staff. And it's on your job descriptions. It's everywhere, right? And I think teaching, like you said, making great humans, great young adults, teaching to the swimmers is another area. So you completely embraced the work and you made it a reality. You're walking the walk. And I think that's why you're getting the benefits. And, we talk all the time that people want to align with other people who meet their values. Well, that's no different. Like you said, when you're spending the money on a club, you want to align with organizations that align with your values. And that is not only from the family members. I'm sure if you haven't already, you will see that come in through sponsorships and everything else, because these people want to know that they're sponsoring a club or using their money wisely, and they want to align themselves with clubs who actually walk the walk on what they talk about. And it's not just, words or, words on paper. So I have to commend you guys because you went all out, and I use you guys as an example all the time on the vision, values, and behaviors. So congratulations on that. And I'm so happy to hear that you've made those strides. It's really good.
We appreciate it. Like I said, if you hadn't led us down the path, it's not something we would have chosen on our own. So,
Right. All right, I have two more questions for you. First one is I want to go back to something you said at the beginning of the conversation when you said you guys were faced with either having to buy your pool or finding another pool. I think it might serve the listeners to understand, and I know, you don't have to spend all day, but I think, kind of understanding how you guys prioritize the decision. Like what did you go through in order to decide, oh, no, we're going to buy the pool because that's what you did versus, go and find another one. So how did you come to the decision to purchase the pool that you're
so
in?
that's really interesting. And I think that, to backtrack a little bit, I believe, we end up in the right place at the right time for the role that we need to have. And the first president of the club, when the club split off from another local club, happened to be a former member of the Peace Corps. And that was necessary to get us started,
Okay.
At the right time and, heal wounds. And it was actually fantastic that I was not a part of that and didn't carry forward any of that drama, emotion, angst, whatever. My history in,
Right.
properties was knowing how to buy a property, was in banks, financing. So I was fortunate to have that knowledge to be able to guide the club through where we were. We had worked with, so when 757 started, we were actually in an outdoor pool, an outdoor 25-yard
Okay.
pool. We got a neighborhood to agree to let us put in a heater and practice there through the winter with 6 lanes and 30 kids and tried to make it work. And then shortly after that, we worked with a facility locally known as the WIS, the Williamsburg Indoor Sports Complex, and talked to them about the possibilities of adding a pool to their facility. And so we did a lot of research and gave them information from USA Swimming. And long story short, they decided to, jump off the deep end. And it's my understanding, I wasn't there at the time. I was not a part of 757 at the time, but it's my understanding that in all of the pro formas, everything was laid out to say basically having us secured as their main renter would take care of the mortgage. And that,
Oh, good.
the other costs, the insurance, the power, the payroll, whatever, that they would need to have a really robust lessons and instructional program to fill out the other part of the equation. And so it was kind of a two, and there were lots of pro formas to say that that could be very successful and work well. The challenge ended up being, while the folks at the Whisk are fantastic guys and they have been really, really successful, they're soccer guys. And they really didn't know
Mm-hmm.
how to dig in and embrace. It was great that they had us, and so they knew they had part of the equation, but they never built a prominent and successful lessons and instructional program. And so, long story short, we were 3 years into our lease with them, and the pool was losing money hand over fist. And basically, their position was that they
Right.
weren't going to keep it. So they were either going to sell it to someone, and we were going to lose what is our home primary water, or it was going to get turned over potentially to the county to run, in which case we would have to share time with other clubs. And so we were in this position of losing, basically at this point we had over 200 swimmers, losing our space. Um, they had talked about, or you can stay and we'll double your rent. Well, we couldn't afford that. That wasn't an option. Um, and so there weren't a whole lot of choices. And we were at this point, it was 2020, late 2020. And so through COVID, there had
Mm-hmm.
been a fair amount of really attractive SBA loans out there with really attractive interest rates. And so we started, and full disclosure, we did not end up using one of those. So you don't have to have a COVID SBA loan to make this
Yeah.
work. But it's what got us thinking, okay, this could be possible. How could we do this? Because really, losing the pool wasn't an option. I mean, we needed it. And so we had
Right.
to put together our own numbers on, can we make the lessons program work that they, I think they just really didn't have the expertise and the knowledge. They embarked on something and thought that it
Right.
was going to be um, easier than it was. And a pool can be a whole animal of its own. I think they may have underestimated the repairs, the
Yeah.
chemicals, the whole thing. But we then had to prepare pro formas, and bless Morgan's heart, to her credit, her history is in athletics and in coaching, but she is so willing to learn, and she is so willing to dig her teeth in. And now she knows a whole lot more about financing and insurance and buying a pool than she ever, buddy, you got to calm down, than she ever has before. And we
Right.
were able to pull it off, and we put together a capital campaign, and we were able to raise money from local sponsors, from businesses in town. It was an all in, all hands on deck effort, but it wasn't what we chose. It wasn't that we wanted to be pool owners. I think we would have been happier to have continued paying our rent and just be renters and not have
Yeah.
to worry about when the pump breaks or when the fire alarm goes off at 2 a.m. or all of those pieces of the puzzle. But I do
Right.
think it has allowed us to grow in a way that we would not have grown had we not taken that step.
Yeah, and it gives you the flexibility as well, to make changes, or, like you said, if you go down or you go up, or you can add more programs. It just offers so much flexibility as well, instead of having to constantly renegotiate your status at the pool with
Yeah,
a
no,
different owner.
and they had,
Yeah.
I went through one renegotiation with them, and they had all the leverage, meaning we needed so they could
Yeah.
charge us whatever they wanted.
Yeah.
So that was no fun. At least at least now
Yeah.
it is ours, and we can make those decisions.
Right. Great. 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 All right. I have one more question for you. So I mentioned earlier that one of the problems with having new board members is sometimes you don't have people that are really skilled, and they've just put their hand up to volunteer because there's space and you need to volunteer. What is some advice you would offer the board, other boards out there, in trying to recruit new board members? Like, what are the things that they should do that would make the process easier? If you don't want to go that route, you could also go, if you're thinking about becoming a board member, what are the things that you should know and understand before you put your hand up to be the board member?
So I would say that in recruiting, every board needs to come up with a checklist of minimum requirements of what people need to be able to offer to make it work. Because there are a ton of well-meaning members who think that we like meet once a month for coffee and talk about suggestions and just implement a few things, um, who would all love to be on the board, and yet they don't have the capacity. There are lots of people with great
Right.
ideas, but are they going to be there when it follows through? And so I think a checklist, um, that any board can send out to potential new members, or a really thoughtful membership application, like board membership application, is
Mm-hmm.
really beneficial as a screening tool and as an educational tool for the other side, because somebody who thinks that they're applying needs to know what they're getting into. A few times we've brought people
Right.
on board and they thought, oh my gosh, I had no idea. And then they get in and they're there for 2 years and they don't want to not fulfill their responsibility, but they never had the time in the first place. They don't want to not love the
Right.
club. They don't want to let anybody down, but it was never a fit from the get go. So, the skill sets,
Right.
yes, are important. Um, and I think the skill sets being diverse are important. So if you get a slew of good applications, then more power to you, because I've found that, once they know the commitment level, getting the number of applications is a challenge. So, there is
Yeah.
a point at which you need people. I mean, I recognize that if you can't find anyone, you need people. But in order for your club to really soar, those people need to have some diversity. For example, one of our new board members, Margaret Keithley, is I don't know what they're called, an independent marketing consultant. She's built her own marketing business and she's fantastic.
Okay.
But Margaret is wonderful at getting people to do anything and make them feel good about it. So she's in charge of our volunteers, and she can
Yes.
explain to them really eloquently why it's important, what the positive impact is, why um, why it needs to happen. But she's also not going to let herself get run over. If somebody says, "Oh, hey, I need,
Right.
I found out my kid doesn't swim till I can't work my morning shift because I found out my child doesn't swim till later." She is very good at coming back and saying, well, no, this is what you committed to, and this is what we need. And, so she's not going to get run over, but she has that
Right.
great, unique skill set. Our treasurer happens to be the CFO of NASA Langley. That's unique to the Virginia Peninsula,
Oh, wow.
but we have an
Yeah.
area of, or an office of NASA here, and we have their CFO as a former swim mom and our treasurer. And so she brings, not only because we had a couple of people volunteer to be our treasurer, and they're like, oh yeah, well, I've kept the books for my son's Boy Scout club or for my church, and it was great. And I'm
Right.
going, well, we have $1 million budget. This is not, you need to be able to read the
Mm.
balance sheet. You need to know, all the pieces of the puzzle. And Lisa is just fantastic at that. We've just got a
Right.
very diverse, if you have a bunch of people that are all from the same background, it's not going to accomplish the tasks you need to accomplish. Um,
Yeah, there'll always be gaps in
Well,
tasks
and
or
we
work,
really wanted
you know.
a
Yeah.
lawyer on the board. And we talked to a few of them among our membership when we were recruiting board members last year. And one gentleman in particular said, listen, I love the club. I don't have time to be on the board. He said, but I am happy to offer you legal advice anytime you need it. And he said, so,
That's
I can't
great.
be the board member, but at least we were able then to say, okay, if we don't find an attorney to fill one of these slots, at least we have somebody we can fall back on. And so we were able to, look
Right.
in some other areas. And we're really fortunate.
Well, I love that. I love that because, you're already demonstrating that you have to have a balance of skills and capacity. It doesn't matter how skilled you are if you don't have the capacity to do the work. So what you ended up doing is turning that into, it still solves a problem, but it's a bit creative, right? So they don't have to donate as much time. They can be an advisor and you can check in and out with them, and they're not constantly having to be on the board and deliver monthly, as the other board members have. So that's good. That's really
Yeah, that
creative.
that was
That's
helpful.
great.
I think the biggest thing really is the capacity. That's the one I would stress because
Yeah.
I don't think people have any idea how much time it takes. And, when you've got members, and this isn't, I think every club does this, but they are in it for the extent that their kid is involved. I mean, that's what got us all involved in the
Right.
first place, right? But if you are, for example, the social chair of a specific group or the group leader of a parent leader of a specific group, and then your child moves groups and you say, okay, I'm out. I can't, like, I can do it for the new group, but I'm no longer part of this group without recognizing that
Right.
you took on this responsibility and there's a group of families. Certainly can we look for someone new to do it and form a transition? That's one thing. But when you're just like, well, my child's no longer in that group, so I'm done. I recognize
Mm.
that yes, it is no longer a direct benefit to you as an individual or your child, but you have taken on this responsibility on behalf of the club. And so if you've seen
Right.
that type of um, behavior, and then that person is like, but I'd love to be on the board. Well, not everything that you do as a board member is going to directly affect your child. You have to be
Right.
willing to have the capacity and have the capacity for the club as a whole, not just have the capacity to
Right.
the extent that when my kid is on deck and at practice or in a meet, I'm happy to do whatever you need me to do because I need to be there anyway. Well, that's great, but we need you to
Yeah.
be willing to have the capacity on behalf of the entire club.
Right. Right. And I think you said it well that, a lot of times when people jump on the board, they think they're going to be able to affect change for their kid and their kid's group. And often that's nowhere near any of the work that they do.
Absolutely.
So, it's kind of, yeah, yeah. So it's interesting. All right, Shannon. Well, I really appreciate you coming on board. I'm sure that a lot of people are able to take on your experiences and your words of advice and apply it to their own organization. So I really appreciate you spending time with us today. I
I
really do.
appreciate it, and we appreciate all that you've done for us, Renata. I have to say, the biggest thing when you say that after a club, employs you or uses your services, that you'll be available for a year, you
Mm-hmm.
really do that, and we really appreciate it. Like the ability to call you and
Oh,
bounce
thank
something
you.
off of you or ask a question and then not like get a bill every time I ask a question. Um, like you completely deliver on that. Like for anyone you're working with who thinks, is she really going to do that? She absolutely delivers on that. And I think the value of that is almost equal to what we spent on the work itself. I mean, it just really has been a wonderful
Yeah.
asset. So thank you.
Oh, thanks. That's great. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. All right. Thank you.